Hello, hi YouTubers. So today we are going to discuss about a Linux operating system. There are like a lot of people keep on asking me the questions like which Linux distributions can I use, and they have a doubt like whether it's a Linux or Linux distributions, or whether it's a Ubuntu or whether it's a Red Hat, and there are like a lot of questions. Even the freshers they keep on getting in their mind like which Linux to use. So before going it with all these things, so let's introduce myself. So I'm Bhavit, like with having 7+ years of experience in software development and around 6+ years of experience working with Ubuntu and different Linux operating system as my development work. So let's get started. So the first thing, basic things everyone should know is what is this Linux distribution, whether it is a Linux or a Linux distribution. So the basic thing is the Linux. The Linux is not an Linux operating system, it is a Linux kernel. So Linux is a family of open source Unix-like operating system based on Linux kernel. That means we are taking a Linux kernel and we are developing an operating system called a Linux. So there is no such operating systems which name as Linux. So what actually whenever someone says like I am using Linux, that means they are using one of the distribution of Linux, not the Linux as operating system itself. So what is meant by distribution? So let's say like this is a Linux kernel. So this is the actual Linux which Torvald has wrote initially, and there is a desktop environment and there is a package management, and the mix of these three things together we can create a Linux distributions. So these distributions are nothing but Ubuntu, Fedora, Red Hat, Linux Mint, Arch Linux, Pop OS. So there are a hell lot of Linux distributions available in market. So if you go to Google and search for Linux distributions, you can see there are a lot of distributions are available. So now we get lot of confusion like whether which Linux distributions to use. So to answer that questions today I'll be showing like which Linux distribution to choose and how it works. So before that one, so we need to understand what is this desktop environment. So in simple way, the desktop environment is nothing but the way we are representing this Windows. Here, like in a Windows operating system, you see this is nothing but one window, and there is a browser, and here is a one window, another window. So we have a Linux kernel that is basically taking care of how the Linux system works. So to visualize the operating system or like to work with an operating system, we need a desktop. So that desktop is nothing but this desktop environment. So there are like various desktop environment. If you see in Google Linux desktop environments, so here you can see XFCE, LXDE, Mate, Synonym, KDE Plasma, LXQT, Budgie. So the list keep on goes. There are a hell lot of desktop environments present. So that means like each XFCE, this Mate, each one have their own way and own style of giving and representing an UI. So that is nothing but a desktop environment. So the next thing is we need to understand what is package management. So whenever you install a Linux operating system, let's say you installed one of the Linux distributions called Ubuntu. In my system, this is nothing but a Ubuntu. So in Windows, you can see like whenever you want to install a software, you go to online and you download that software and you click on the executable, then you click on next, and it is installed, everything is done. So but in Linux environment what happens is, here you can see this is a Linux distributions. There are a hell lot of distributions. So the program which is installed with this PI, again like the program which is installed for this Ars Linux or Mint or Ubuntu, all those things which is supplied from uh, the particular vendor, the Ubuntu, the software for the Ubuntu can be coming from the Canonical, or it may be any open source software, and even the Fedora. The Fedora is nothing but a open source version of Red Hat system. So all these softwares are supplied with something called as package management. So that means whenever you want to install any software from any distributions, let's take an example of Ubuntu. Let's say I want to install an operating system, sorry, not operating system, some software on Ubuntu. Then what we are going to do is like we are going to open a terminal, and then we used to say like sudo apt install, let's say vim. So what happened behind the scene? So here you can see it is keep on reading like the repositories. So each distribution has their own repository, and each distributions in that they have a list of all the softwares which is available. So whenever you say vim, sudo apt install vim, so it internally maps to some of the URL of this repository. The first thing is like you should be connected to an internet, and the next thing is that a list for this vim, that URL should be present in your desktop, not a desktop, in your Ubuntu operating system. So it goes and fetch from the Ubuntu repository and it installs. So what happens if there is no package, like no URL present for vim in Ubuntu? At the time manually we can go ahead and search for the software, and we can download and we can install from the internet. So same like how we are using with the Windows. So each Linux distributions has its own package management. In our case in Ubuntu we use apt. Apt is one package management system, so where it downloads the software from the Ubuntu repository. Same like that, each distribution has their own package management system. So that means all the software will be available here, so you can download using their own commands. Let's say in Ubuntu we are using apt, and in Fedora instead of apt there may be yum command. So these are all the different commands which is used to download the software from their repository, particular repository. So the next thing is like we know the desktop environment, we know the package management, we know what is Linux kernel. Now we know like how this Linux distribution is created. Now to choose which operating system, like which OS is better suits for you. So my suggestion is like as a new fresher, you can go ahead with directly with the Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is using a GNOME desktop environment, which is nothing but like you see how it is coming like this. Whenever I click on this dots, this entire things are popped up, like all these applications are present here. So same like that one, if you use some other desktop environment, instead of this one, like there will be some other menu or some other things which looks similar to Windows. So first thing is like we need to know like what are all the different desktop environment. Next, this package management. Anyway, this one you can ignore. You no need to know what is the package management in order to like initially work with the Linux desktop environment. So based on that one, you choose whichever the Linux operating system you want, and you choose like which looks good for your taste. Like let's say like you directly come from Windows, and suddenly whenever you see this menu and like where the application lies, where is the control panel, how it works, all those things can be easily seen in this environment. So same like this, each distribution has their own environment. So my suggestion is like whenever you are coming from Windows, the first thing is like the OS called Zorin OS. So this Zorin OS is almost like Windows itself, so you don't feel like you are coming from any another operating system. So here you can see there are like a lot of menus which is almost similar to Windows. So here you can click and there is a Windows style, so you won't feel like you are started working with another Linux operating system. So that you are started getting familiarized with a terminal and a Linux desktop environment, how to install software and all those things. So then later you can go with the Ubuntu. So even Ubuntu is using a GNOME desktop environment, and you can download and you can install the Ubuntu operating system. So the basic thing is like choose a desktop environment and choose which distributions you want to work. So the main thing which we can see from the Linux operating system is a desktop environment. So you choose whichever you like and go ahead with your Linux distribution. So that is what the basic things, like you can get started with the Linux operating system.